Okay, so in a recent live stream I was asked to do some more videos on the NHL, and I thought a good topic to discuss was the 1992 player strike that took place 30 years ago to this very day. It was ongoing. It lasted for 10 days in April 1992, and the backdrop to it and the aftermath to it are very, very important in the direction the NHL has taken and the direction it was taking at the time. It's a crucial crossroads moment, as we would say. Now, players voted for strike action on the 1st of April. It lasted until the 10th of April. 560 players voted in favour of strike action. That were NHLPA members, and 4 voted against. Only 4 were willing to play on that season. Now, the causes of the player strike go back to 1967, ironically, with Alan Eggleston setting up the NHLPA. Later transpired he was stealing from the Players' Pension Fund, amongst other fraudulent activity during 1967 all the way through to January the 1st, 1992. He was a bit of a crook, but he is replaced by Bob Goodenough, who was a player agent and was already involved with the NHLPA. He becomes the chief executive of the NHLPA, and the players are frustrated with things. They basically played the 91-92 season up to this point with no collective bargaining agreement. That expired in the off-season after the 1990-91 season, so that would not happen today, by the way. A lapsed CBA would automatically lead to a lockout or strike. Playing a whole season with no worker rights, basically, was part of the reason why it led to this strike action. The issues that the players were concerned about were free agency and arbitration, which are always very, very complex. And the rules regarding free agent arbitration have changed multiple times following each CBA negotiation and the 3 subsequent lockouts the NHL has undergone in its existence. Playoff bonuses was a real key point of contention because the players argued, and quite correctly, that the owners would make the majority of their profits in the playoffs. Massive amount of profits in the playoffs, and they only got limited bonuses for appearing in said playoffs, and those players that didn't appear in the playoffs didn't get any bonuses, basically. So playoff bonuses was a bone of contention, and again with subsequent CBA agreements and lockouts down the line, that was another issue that regularly came up that was resolved. Pensions. Now, this is where Alan Eggleston was nicking from the Players' Pension Fund, and there were concerns about player pensions post-retirement, which has always been a concern, quite frankly. And now with things like the CTE lawsuit, it's raised its head again, and pensions was a big concern for players. And of course, what happened to Alan Eggleston, we could look at the issues that Alan Eggleston created. That was a big thing. But the main stumbling point in regards to this strike, Bob Goodenough has gone into negotiations with President Ziegler, who was president of the NHL at the time, and they were having good discussions on free agency and arbitration, playoff bonuses and pensions. The sticking point that actually led to the strike was revenue sharing via on trading cards, player likeness. Now, the NHL video games that 2K and EA Sports have produced since 1994 create a lot of revenue for the league, and the players get a lot of revenue out of that. But in 1992, their main source of image licensing, as we would call it these days, and copyright was player cards, trading cards, mainly made by O-Pee-Chee. And they weren't feeling that they were getting a fair share of the revenue sharing, which they were hoping would be 50-50. The league and the owners were making the majority of the money out of the revenue of those trading cards. Yet it was the player's likeness that was on said playing cards. So that was actually the stumbling point. And in the end, the players voted heavily in favour of strike action, which commenced on the 1st of April. Now, this is before the playoffs have started, and there was a concern that the rest of the season and the playoffs would be completely lost and there'll be no Stanley Cup in 1992 being awarded. Thankfully, the duration of the strike was limited to 10 days. And obviously, ultimately, the Stanley Cup was awarded in 1992 and the playoffs played in full, and the rest of the season played in full. Games were rearranged, but this is key. The aftermath is very, very important. The players and the league agreed to a 1-year CBA temporarily, which then lapsed again. They played another full season without a CBA in 93-94, which then ultimately led to the 94-95 lockout, which basically cost half a season the 2 years later. The regular season was extended from 80 to 84 games for a brief period before being reduced to 82 following the 94-95 lockout. And Gary Bettman was appointed the first and so far the only commissioner the NHL has ever had. He has been in that position now for 27 years. Now, fans love to hate Gary Bettman, but he was actually installed partly because he had worked for the NBA and he actually introduced the NBA's salary cap in his role at the NBA, which is still in place. And the owners wanted cost certainty. They wanted to avoid further labour disputes with the playing group, and that was his remit, was stabilise the game's finances. And of course, expansion has happened in the Gary Bettman era. It's known as the expansion era, although it was already beginning in the early 90s. The modern expansion era, it has continued under Gary Bettman's time as commissioner. And that is a key aftermath. But another aftermath is the 94-95 lockout, because no permanent CBA could be negotiated for the next 2 years, and that was a failure of the NHL and the NHLPA. It eventually cost Bob Goodenough his job at the NHLPA, but the reason why he got appointed was that Alan Eggleston was seen as far too matey and chummy with the owners, and it later transpired that Alan Eggleston was actually stealing from the players, especially from their pension fund, and he did go to prison for fraud. And he had been in the NHLPA since 1967. He helped found it, but he was a bit of a crook, and he got found out, and yeah. But Bob Goodenough wouldn't last in the NHLPA for very, very long, but it is very, very interesting that there was still no salary cap at this point. And that would not be fully implemented to what we see now until much, much later on, after the 2004-2005 lockout, which cost a whole season. And that was something the owners were very, very afraid of, was losing that playoff revenue, that Stanley Cup revenue, and the rest of the regular season revenue. They were terrified of losing that money, which is one of the reasons why this strike didn't last very long. The issues around free agency and arbitration constantly get brought up. The rules around free agency and arbitration regularly get tweaked, as we've seen with every CBA and the 3 subsequent lockouts the league has actually suffered. Playoff bonuses are no longer really a major issue. That's largely been solved. Pensions is no longer really a major issue. They became an issue because of Alan Eggleston and his relationship with the owners and his theft of that pension fund. But revenue sharing is still a bone of contention with the NHLPA and the NHL. And every CBA negotiation, revenue sharing is a big discussion point, massive discussion point. And of course, the salary cap as well, which has now been brought in to bring cost certainty, is another discussion point. But revenue sharing, regardless of what the revenue sharing is, always becomes a discussion point. But there we go, the 1992 player strike of the NHL. It lasted 10 days. There hasn't been one since, although there have been 3 lockouts. But it led to a lot of changes with how the NHL is governed, with Gary Bettman obviously becoming commissioner 2 seasons later, and changes in the NHLPA as well, and accountability. And a lot of the issues that were discussed then ultimately led to subsequent labour issues with the 94-95 lockout, which we saw a couple of seasons later. But there we go, thank you very much for watching. There's my brief little overview of the 1992 NHL player strike. Hopefully it's the only player strike we have in NHL history, although you cannot predict anything. Look what happened with Major League Baseball over this winter, and the issues that Major League Baseball has faced throughout its history, and I've done videos on Major League Baseball. The NHL, it had a period of labour unrest between 1992 and 2013, 3 lockouts and a player strike, and we haven't seen any issues in the 9 years since. Now, hopefully that remains the case long term, and there is labour stability in the NHL, because it's one of my favourite leagues to watch. But we may see further issues down the line, you just don't know. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I'll have some more videos for you very, very soon.